IVM.
How would you like to be rewarded for paying your credit card bills on time? Cred gives you the chance to be part of an exclusive club of highly trustworthy individuals where you get cashback and other rewards for being good. Now that's a great policy. So don't miss out. Just download Cred and be part of the club.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of All Things Policy. The Indian military is an ideal example of the military staying away from the corridors of politics. Service record is no guarantee that a person will get elected in India. Very few ex-servicemen or women go into politics, but this is not the norm globally. For example, in the US, the service record is used as an election plank, often as presidential as well as other elections. Dwight Eisenhower, the topmost general of World War II, ended up becoming the president of the United States. In India, however, the defense forces are in a state of flux with regard to modernization and face multiple threats. So in a recent article written by Lieutenant General Prakash Menon, he brings out the need for the defense minister in India to have a service background, and we talk to him in today's ATP episode to talk about this. So with no further introduction, welcome General Menon and Rituraj.
Thank you.
So my first question to you is quite simple. So I want to ask you, what are the qualities possessed by a person of military background that deem them fit for taking up a role of something as prestigious as a defense minister? And how differently will they be able to strategize compared to leaders who are solely political in nature?
I think the greatest value the military institution is proud of is its integrity, that it can act honestly, put the nation before self. And that sense of sacrifice is its greatest part. It is an ethical value which is not easily found in the civil world, and which militaries, especially Indian military, has always been proud of at least supposed to have. Although in practice, you might find quite a lot of violations, but it is a value which is held in high esteem. So when you bring in somebody with the military into another organization, one of the things you expect is that here's a man who's of a high ethical standard. Apart from the fact that in the context of my suggestion that the defense minister should have a military background, I acknowledge that this is only a temporary measure to get past the situation India finds itself in. That there are growing geopolitical threats. There is a major reform in the military structure itself, which I think is very positive. It has to be carried out under uncertain geopolitical conditions. And the worst of all is that because of the pandemic and other reasons, the economy will not be able to provide for the needs of the armed forces. So it's a combination of a situation where we have to take measures which are normally should not be done. And I would agree that the defense minister should be a politician. I would agree that he need not be from the military background. But my case is based on the fact that these are not normal times, that we can only address the problems if we take these risks of having, as a defense minister, a person who is got a military background, understands the nuances of force application and its role in international politics, and yet is able to understand the political conditions under which it has to be applied or exercised or created. And therefore, it needs knowledge of both the military, which is a military professional specialization, and also of a much larger area which he's not probably trained for, but through experience, he's been involved in it. Whereas a politician is zero in the military side because he's never wear a uniform. At least the military guy will have some more knowledge of the political side. And he need not be popularly elected because he's not there because he's a popular political leader. He's there because of the competencies he brings to the job, the knowledge base with which he is. He will be the person who will be effective, not as stirring speeches during election campaign. He will be the guy who behind closed doors in the Cabinet Committee on Security or the National Security Council or any other interaction with domestic and national actors know what to say, how to say it, when to say it. His knowledge will be much deeper on a subject which is not easy for others to understand. So I'm just saying that for this period of time, when India is going through it's one of the most difficult moments, we need a person there who must actually understand both the worlds. A politician cannot possibly do this. And it is therefore no surprise that today, if you really look at it, the USA, Russia, China, UK, they all have defense ministers, they call them by different names, who are of military background. So to say that we should keep the military out of civilians is actually hanging on to something which is not justified. Because eventually we require competence, we require knowledge, because the decisions which he's going to take, and that's why I'm saying this, that we have to take decisions now which have long-term effects. You can't just turn the development of military capacity suddenly because it's all long-term. And more than anything, I think the greatest thing and the strongest thing he will bring there, he will bring a better ethical values into an institution which we see in many ways have got questionable morals. And that is why I say that this is a thing which must be seriously considered. And I make my point in the last para, in which I say that the present defense minister, whose capabilities are quite well known, should actually be moved to health. And the health minister definitely has to take responsibility and do whatever he has to do. But we must put the best man out there. And I think the present defense minister is the man who can actually be in charge of health. And more than anything else, which needs to activate the National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA, which is under the Prime Minister. So a lot of things can be done. We cannot continue with the way that we are because these are challenging times. So to stick on to the idea that how can a military man be in the Ministry of Defense is something which actually is about throwing away your shibboleths and embracing what is required. That's the argument.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think in the face of rising threats and just the state of our country today and how fragile it is, we do need to take some important decisions and preferably those that make sense too. So, Ruturaj, what do you think about this?
Yes, I really like the point where you guys mentioned that the country is in flux. I mean, the pandemics and the multiple threats on different fronts, but also we are undergoing rejig of our Ministry of Defense with the CDS coming in. I would like to ask the general a question in this context: that how would a defense minister with a background would ease this transition, especially when a CDS is coming in? People might argue that there is now representation of armed forces personnel in the defense ministry is increasing, but yet we need a guiding hand, right?
Yes, actually, the CDS, as his appointment says, is a man in uniform. He is the personification of the armed forces in uniform. the defense minister is not in uniform. Defense minister is a politician. The armed forces, in our scheme of things, has its supreme commander as the president. They actually, even the defense minister and the PM acts on behalf of the supreme commander to give instructions to the armed forces. This is the constitutional structure. Therefore, there is supposed to be some distance between the party in power, which is represented by politicians holding ministerial and cabinet posts, and the armed forces. There was supposed to be a distance. And that distance is now, obviously, because of the structural changes, is closing. So the larger question is, and that is what I wrote about in my last piece, that is there now a possibility that the politician in power and the armed forces leadership become in cahoot and use military power for domestic purposes? I think in civil military relations, when I say domestic purposes, for partisan political purposes, for party politics. That is the danger which I have flagged in my last column. I have flagged the danger because of the possibility that this is what we should be careful about. Because the other thing we should be careful about is the armed forces staging a coup, and that is why you have the president as the commander-in-chief. When the armed stages the coup, the armed forces actually will usurp even the president's position, because the commander-in-chief will become the armed force. So that's not what actually India really should be worried about. India should be worried about whether the party in power will cozy up with the senior leadership of the armed forces and use them for narrow partisan politics. That is the danger. And as I can see it, there are always, this danger will get more because of the structural changes. And the structural changes were justified because without them, we could not increase military effectiveness. So, everything does not come on a clean state. There is some baggage which we have to be careful about. We must be worried that this proximity, actually the proximity and the distance is supposed to be constitutional. The proximity is supposed to have a distance according to the constitution. Structurally, now we have closed that distance. We must be careful that the military leadership, and this is the danger which I'm flagging, must always have its ethical shield, that the moral fiber of the armed forces cannot be of the same variety as that one which is actually what is politicians have. Because the armed forces are the ultimate defender of the state. It cannot compromise its ethical values. And that, of course, is a matter of judgment, which will always be the challenge to military leadership itself. Every case will decide how it is to be done, what is to be done, and so on. So I'm just flagging the issue that when you have a military guy as the defense minister, the possibility of collusion with the armed forces will increase. But I'm saying that risk is worth it because there is a prime minister on top who actually can remove the defense minister. It's much more easy for him to remove a defense minister than sack a chief, although he can do both at the same time. But he can actually move the defense minister out much faster. So that control is always there. And therefore, the risk is well worth taking because the prime minister is backed by whom? The prime minister is backed by the National Security Council Secretariat, which is an independent think tank, thinks for itself, advice and so on. So they can keep the oversight and so that this balance is. It is no clear answer. There is nothing which you can get without having a disadvantage. I'm saying in my article that disadvantage is taken care of if the prime minister is sensitive to this problem, unless he becomes part of the problem. Or does the president become part of the problem? Then you can actually have the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, you can have the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Minister and the armed forces all together. That is not how it is constitutionally done. Constitutionally, they have got a distance and a separation. And that separation requires to be maintained. And the army should know as to when it has to say yes and when it has to say no on delicate issues. And not publicly, but it's normally done behind closed doors, straight talk to the political heads. So that's what we actually expect them to do.
Right, General. I wanted to ask you, did India have any defense ministers with a military background in our span of, after independence?
Yeah, actually, we have had two. One in the Nehru's first cabinet, we had General Himmat Singh Ji. He was from the State Forces, Major General of the State Forces, and then he was also a veteran of the British Army in I think the First and the Second World War. And he was a deputy defense minister. In fact, he was sent by Nehru to look at the northern borders, and he had made some suggestions. There's a report which he had made. But he was there not because of his military background as much as he was already had joined Indian national politics. He was a politician, and therefore his background might have come to use for Nehru to put him there as a deputy defense minister. The other person was Jaswant Singh. Jaswant Singh actually had about 9 years of service in the Armored Corps, and then he left and he became a full-time politician. He was for a very short period India's defense minister for 9 months. And he was not there, I think, it was during Vajpayee's time, he was not put there primarily only because of his military background, because also he was a full-fledged politician. See, the choice of who is made and it is purely a prime minister's call. And that's because he will actually have to have trust in him. And therefore, he also has the capability to move him out anytime that you want. What I'm saying is, these are calls which has to be politically made because the circumstances demand it. And that is my argument. I'm not saying that this should become the norm. No.
Understood.
But General Manian, I just want to, so now that you're mentioning that traditionally there's always been this distance that has to be maintained between the armed forces and the government, to what extent do you think it matters, which government is in power? Because obviously trust is a really big aspect to consider here, whether it's between the government and the armed forces or whether it's between the government and the public and the citizens of our country who are who hear of something like this. And, it could, in the extreme sense, it could occur to many citizens that, okay, military coming into the picture would mean, the military will control the military will control the government or will control the way things happen, like in Pakistan and everything. So where does trust come into this among the citizens, government, and the armed forces?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. Actually, but I think it's unfair to compare our military to what is happening in Pakistan, because I have already told you that the Pakistani situation is they have already usurped political power and they are the government actually, sometimes in front, otherwise from behind. Okay, that is never going to be the situation as far as India is concerned, because of the fact that the Indian armed forces general attitude towards governance itself has always been that this is too complicated a country for us to resolve. Okay, we have to be part of the solution, not become part of the problem. So this has been the armed forces. That is why it calls itself an apolitical institution. We are very proud of it, and we know very well that we can't get into this except for limited reasons when the government actually allows them to do it. So the question now is, will the armed forces compromise its integrity and bend down to the pulls of politicians, which is not only with this government. Only it varies in degrees about how much of exercise of power they do over the military. And this exercise is normally done by actually the fact that they control the appointments, who's made the chiefs, who, and all other officers also. It goes to the MOD. They control all that. And that's okay. That's part of civilian control. But, in the sense that the trust issue is like this. The politicians want the army on their side for everything, which is quite natural. But even when they want to misuse it for domestic purposes, there's also a problem which comes away. As far as the citizenry is concerned, the citizens' India's democracy must be concerned that the growing military involvement in civil affairs must be concerned. But that does not mean you'll keep the army out when you require it most, because you're not able to manage it. You're not able to manage it with the instruments which are already there. The armed forces is the last bastion of the state. Use the armed forces whenever it is required. It's like in a pandemic. Use all what you can to save lives. That's what you're supposed to do. Don't say because armed forces cannot be involved in this, they will take over the country and all that. I think that argument really does not really carry as far as India is concerned.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing that I think, I don't know if I am right or not, but I think that generally with our government in power for the last, I don't know how many years, we've not really given that importance to the military that will be able to convince people that, these guys need to step in. So if we can have a final answer from you on this opinion.
Yes. See, the situation facing the country is a national disaster. We have a National Disaster Management Act. We have to invoke that act, have the NDMA at the center, and which is headed by the Prime Minister, and the states activated, and they are the ones who are supposed to now superintendent and fight this at the state and the center level, which has not been done. Okay, this is being done through the Health Ministry and the Medical Council Research or whatever that is. This is a disaster. It calls for measures which cannot be handled by the normal way that we carry out our business. It is a crisis. It requires crisis management. It requires moving out procedures, putting them aside. It requires politicians to take responsibility for what they are doing, because this is not normal procedure. This is not normal times. And so if you think that we can do a L1 system and procure equipment at this stage in a crisis about saving lives, then we are living in a fool's world and we simply don't know how to manage a crisis. And as far as the armed forces is concerned, crisis is their DNA. They're only meant when a nation has a crisis, used when it has a crisis, either to prevent one or to get over one. They know much more about crisis than anybody else in this country, because that is what they are meant for. If the armed forces are not used, and it can be used in many ways, and surely it does not have all the capacity, but it still has tremendous capacity, as long as we are balanced with terms of the geopolitical threats which we have on our northern and western borders, and that the army can decide, we must use the Indian armed forces. They're all inoculated, they are young, and they're willing to sacrifice. Otherwise, in the Indo-Gangetic plain, people will die on the road. Nobody will even know about them. If you have the army deployed out there, at least they will provide the human touch, not anything else. That much the state can do.
Yes, thank you, General Menon, for answering these really important questions. And I hope that we see more of the armed forces, especially now in this health crisis we are facing. They are needed more than ever. So thank you for joining me.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks, General Menon, for the passionate and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you really much. Yeah.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week, Cred, Ciet, thewholetruthfoods.com, and PayPal. We really do appreciate the support. On Cyrus Says, we discussed quite a bit about the local assembly elections this month. Vasanti Hariprakash was there to talk about the West Bengal elections, and then we also spoke to Pradeep Gupta, a psephologist and author. He's the chairman and MD of Access My India. Do definitely check that episode out. Great conversation. Tune into This Round Is On Me, where Gauri Devi Dayal caught up on the latest trends in the PR industry with Archana Jain from PR Pundit. On The Habit Coach, Ashton Doctor spoke to Anandita Chatterjee. She's the founder of Travel Chatter. She's been a marketer with some large firms and has traveled to 67 countries so far. It was a RuPaul Drag Race fan club on KBCD where Farhad and Sunetru discussed the show's best moments and talents. Amber Rana was joined by celebrity fitness trainer Shivoham on New Year Kanun to discuss fitness laws and regulations in India. They talk about the laws and infrastructure that exist to protect gyms, trainers, and also consumers in the fitness industry. And on the note with Maruk Inayat, we have clinical psychologist and friend of the network, Sonali Gupta. She talks about ongoing mental health issues like survivor's guilt, coping with anxiety around the pandemic, and doom scrolling. And with that, we hope to see you again next week.
Hi, I'm Zarina Poonawalla, host of the Empowering Series podcast on the IVM network. I happen to be a peak performance coach and leadership coach by profession, and I'm here to share with you productivity tools, life-altering techniques, and real-life hacks to help you achieve your maximum potential in everything you do, your relationships, professions, careers. So tune in every Monday to unleash your inner power. Be safe, be well, be empowered.